Hello guys, welcome to another session on TestNG, and in this session we will continue discussing about parameterization. Alright, in the previous session we have already seen how at the rate parameter annotation works and how we will be able to pass test data from testng.xml to the test class. And in this class or in this session we will go over data provider. Okay, even before getting into the example, we should learn about arrays and two-dimensional arrays. Okay, arrays and two-dimensional arrays. Okay, arrays stores values in a horizontal manner, right? So say suppose if we say string fruit is equal to apple, so apple is the only value we can assign to the variable fruit, whereas this, when we declare string followed by square brackets, then that means this particular login detail is an array and it accepts more than one as its value. Okay, so when we declare a variable as a string of array of strings, then the data is stored in login details in this format. So this is the first index and this is the second index. In order to fetch username, we will be saying login details of 0, which will fetch username. Login details of 1 will fetch password. Okay, and two-dimensional array, it stores the data differently, that is in a table format. Okay, it can hold multiple sets of data. So here we can say this is one set of data. Likewise, in two-dimensional array we have two sets of data. Okay, one set of data is on the top and the bottom one is another set of data. And also, like arrays, these indexes also start from 0. So the username has a vertical index of 0 and a horizontal index of 0. Alright, so likewise password has an index of 0, because we are saying 0th row and column 1. Okay, so indexes start from 0 and so on, not from 1. So that's the reason I'm saying 0 as the index here and here as well. Okay, whenever we try to fetch the data from this two-dimensional array login details, this variable or object will have all this information, and at a time it will go through each element horizontally first, and then once after finishing all fetching all the data horizontally, it will move to the next row and it will start fetching the data from this next row, and it will also try to fetch all the data horizontally from this row. If we had another row over here, after completing the second row it will move on to the third row to fetch the data. Alright, so this is the what data provider implements and provides the data using this two-dimensional array. Okay, now let us go and look into some of the examples. Alright, here this is our test class login test method again, and here we were in the previous example passing data from testng.xml, but now instead of fetching from testng.xml we will try to fetch that from a data provider. So how to write a data provider in first place? Okay, so for that we will be using @data provider annotation, and to this data provider we have to give a name attribute. Okay, we have to name this data provider, and we can say login test data as the name of this data provider. Okay, next we have to write a method which actually returns the data. Okay, for that we will be writing public, and this time, like here we have written void, we won't be writing void, but we will be writing object. So we are expecting an object to be returned once after this method is being called. Okay, so let us write give a name as login credentials, right? And we'll start writing the method over here. Object login credentials, right? Login credentials. Now that is what we are saying, that this method is going to return an object. So what is that object that is going to be returned? That is what we will be writing now. So we say object credentials, and since it is an array, we will be enclosing that in a curly braces. And since we want to give more than one set of data, right? Previously we used two tests to test the login test with two sets of data, right? So similarly now we want to test or implement the same using data provider. So that's the reason we are wrapping two sets of data and adding that to the credentials. Okay, now we will write John as one user and password as 4 months, right? And also we want to add another set of data which is invalid Tom 1234 and password, some password which is not valid. Alright, since it is a object declaration, we have to end with a semicolon, and since we are saying this method is going to return an object, we have to return something, and that something will be in this credential, and this credential objects will now contain two sets of data. First one is about first user and that user's password. Second one is second user's name and that user's password. So now let us return credentials. Okay, now we have created a method which returns an object and linking that to a data provider which has a name login test data. Now we have to pull the test data from this method into our login test. And how do we do that? We will actually write down the data provider name and we'll try to fetch the data, and we can give that data provider name next to our different attributes, priority and groups, like putting a comma and adding data provider, and by entering the name login test data, login test data. So we are saying this method will be using a data provider which was declared with the name login test data. Right, now we should start using that test data from here. Okay, for now I will be removing this parameters tag, and we do not want to fetch the data from TestNG.xml, but we want to fetch the data from login test data provider. Okay, to make sure that we are fetching from there, what we will do is we will remove this extra test tag which we have written earlier, and also we will remove these parameters from this test tag. Alright, we will keep groups as a login to include for the run, so that we want to run only this test. Okay, and since we are going to use this data provider, the expectation is now this gets executed twice and prints this same message below on the console when we run it. So let's run this and check. Right, so okay, now these two messages got printed, and that is what we have passed from the data provider. So John 1111 and Tom 1234, and this some invalid password that we wanted to test with. So this data is coming from this one. If we want to add one more set of data, we can write it saying Mary and password 1234, and now rerun the TestNG.xml, and this time we will see 3 lines of data getting printed over here. So this means when this test login executed, it fetched the first row from this object and passed the values as username and password, and since this object has another row, it executed again one more time, and this time it fetched Tom and the linked password as usernames and passwords, and also once after finishing that, it has found another set of data, so it has executed one more time. Altogether this has executed 3 times and printed the messages accordingly to our console. Okay, this is how we will be providing the data provider. So when compared to the parameter annotation, this is looking much simpler and neat when and with a very less number of lines of code. Okay, so the previous one was little bit complicated, where we were passing the test data from TestNG.xml, and for the number of data sets we were adding these test tag those many times. That is increasing the length of the file and increasing the complexity of maintaining that TestNG.xml file. Okay, and there is also one more thing which we want to look at. So currently this data provider is in the same test class. What if we want to use some other data provider that is present in another class? Okay, so for to see that quickly, we will add one more Java class, and then we will say alternative test data provider. Okay, and we will create that class over here, and in this we will rewrite the data provider details, and this time we will simply copy this one and paste it over there. And now since we want to see the difference between this data provider and that data provider, let us rename or give a different names for this set of data. So let us say Eva, Mindy, Jacob. Okay, and we give different passwords 5678. Okay, and we will rename or change the name of this data provider, and we will call it alternative login test data. Okay, now let us try to use or fetch the data from this data provider into our place online order test class. Okay, for that what we will be doing is we will say data provider as alt login test data, and we will be saying like what is the class in which that was written. Okay, data provider, and this time we will be selecting data provider class, right? We'll be selecting the data provider class, and we will give the class name alternative, and it has already showing that class in the suggestions, so I am selecting that one. So now when we run this one, instead of seeing the names John, Tom, Mary, we are now expected to see Eva, Mindy and Jacob. So let's now run this and see. See, Eva, Mindy, Jacob with the updated passwords getting printed over here. Alright, so this is how data provider works, and it is much simpler and neat looking code when compared to the @parameters annotation. Alright, and this is what we call data driven testing, right? The act of testing a particular test case with multiple sets of data is nothing but a data driven test, and to that we are passing data from a data provider, that is one from within the class and the other from outside the class. And in our projects outside, we will be passing the data like from an Excel sheet, maybe from an Excel TestNG.xml file, maybe from an external class, or sometimes maybe from a Cucumber feature file, and sometimes can be through a CSV file, right? All these things can be called as data driven testing. Okay, hope you understand this concept, and practice it, try to implement this, and you will master this one. Even though it might look confusing at the very beginning, you will get used to that, and things will start getting clearer to you as you keep on practicing until you feel comfortable. All right, thank you and see you in the next class.